It's strange to consider that my favorite hack-and-slash male power fantasy character of my childhood would remain amongst my favorites as a now 26-year-old man passionate about narrative character analysis. But Kratos has changed. He isn't the character I fell in love with as an over-energized 12-year-old. There's more to Kratos. And to be fair, maybe there always has been. But undeniably, he's undergone an overhaul that's taken the gaming world by storm and reassessed the role of narrative within it. God of War has helped video gaming as a medium to be treated more and more seriously as a form of art, as it always should have been. Kratos, as a character, has always had depth to him. Even his early 2000s iteration was motivated by a deep sense of guilt and trauma towards his hypermasculine performance of domination and revenge. But, importantly, it was these and not control or lust for power that drove him. Instead, these were the motivations of those who controlled him. Olympus, tricking him into the slaughter of his family and holding the weight of emotional manipulation as a stick on a treadmill above him, mirrors cultural attitudes of masculinity as the sociopathic power wielders at the top of dominance hierarchies manipulate the more empathetic, normal players along the chain through what they crave but as men are not allowed to show: vulnerability and emotional absolution. The Godslayer, we know, has always been coated in the ashes of his loved ones, and even as he performs perfection in maybe history's most cold, rigid, soldiering form of masculinity, Spartanhood, he's able to easily beat down the most comically terrifying monsters. But his biggest challenge ever comes in an intense button-mashing puzzle to leave behind his recently reunited daughter to save her. This has always been Kratos. The Greek trilogy and its more contemporary side games contain the visualization of this trapped sense of masculinity, boiling over but blinded from seeing what direction to even flow into that pervaded Western culture throughout the 20th century. Yet, in its end, we watch our hero kill his father, emblematic of, yes, overcoming the progenitor of these ills of masculinity, but through the very means of action that they have instilled upon him. This hypocrisy, paired in his emptiness, leads to running the Sword of Olympus, a literal, massive phallic object containing the collective strength of those at the top of the masculine hierarchy, through him as he tries to relieve himself through death. However, he's unable to die, saved by the most powerful force within the trilogy, an abstraction as seen through the childlike wonder of a young girl, a tangible form of hope. And Kratos lives to fight another day, and to venture to a new land where maybe he can find peace. The Norse saga begins with a shocking amount of change. Kratos is older, more subdued, and a father now. The change shocked the world of gaming. One of its most iconic series taking a huge left turn like this was nearly unheard of. Well, other than Zelda doing it literally the year before, but you know. And playing the new game felt jarringly different. First of all, there is constant dialogue throughout your journey. The series is abandoning video games' tendency towards attempting to be film, especially in the sort of show don't tell mantra. Instead, choosing to intersperse dialogue and emotional development throughout gameplay, making deeply effective use of its artistic space. This mechanism grants us immediate and constant insight into Kratos and Atreus. Kratos is seemingly a better man, but he has no idea how to be a father. All he wants is Atreus to grow up better than him, but unfortunately, he is him. He is Kratos, and that means all of the lack of emotional intelligence, the fear of vulnerability, and the undealt with trauma and guilt which is his burden. He engages with Atreus less like a father, as he has no reference point on how to do so. He spent most of his life trying to kill his own, and more like the closest thing to a real father he's ever had, a Spartan commander. He's militant and harsh with Atreus, he demonstrates almost no understanding, and over the course of the game he consistently drives him away. Our main antagonist, Baldur, is positioned as an obvious foil of Kratos. He's just like Kratos was. He's nigh invincible, he kills indiscriminately, and he's motivated by an unshowable sense of emotional longing. He's an excellent villain. The game's plot of trying to move on from the death of Faye with the obstacle of Baldur, an image of Kratos' past, mirrors exactly the thematic narrative of Kratos seeking to understand and move on from who he was, what he's become, and maybe who he can be for him and his son. In similar effect, the mechanics of the game mirror the contrast of the old saga and the new. The Greek games were a hack-and-slash power fantasy of Kratos annihilating scores of terrifying creatures, many bigger than could be contained on the screen. The controls were largely button mashing, as the same combos would work on any enemy, given Kratos' might and his rage. In the new games, we find a much more intricate combat system. The game demands tact and user input, and employs defense? And the player must think about how to approach every battle. The mechanics are largely inspired by Dark Souls, and the transition of mechanics being influenced by new, progressive ideas heavily coincide with the evolution in thematic focus. So, we've transitioned in nearly every way from the dominant hack-and-slash power fantasy title of the early 2000s to, nearly 20 years later, a much more mature story about fatherhood. And just at the time that the target demographic of the franchise in its early years are they themselves entering fatherhood age. Poetic. But Kratos has a lot of work to do in building a meaningful relationship with Atreus, or
boy.
Yeah, that is definitely intentional. Haha, symbolism. But we know that this is a lack of emotional ability rather than a lack of love, as evidenced by the previous games. If the impetus for the entire story and the profound sense of guilt wasn't enough to demonstrate how much Kratos loves his children, that terrifying button-mashing challenge surely is. Kratos spends much of God of War 2018 running away from his past while trying to micromanage Atreus towards his ill-conceived, closed-off image of healthy masculinity. Trust and truth become the conflicts forming the wedge between them. Eventually, fighting the sons of Thor, Atreus falls ill, sick with the contradiction of his perception of his identity. He believes himself a man when he is a god. His path to finding identity was blocked rather than supported by his father, as is much of the failings in fatherhood. The contrast of identity is interesting given how Godhood is presented within the franchise, and how it forms conflict in Kratos' mind. Godhood, throughout the God of War series, is consistently presented as a form of masculinity bent on power and ego rather than love and understanding. It's the ills of Kratos' masculine conflict which he failed to understand throughout our early games. And it makes sense. There are no dominating female characters through the franchise. All of the women gods in the Greek saga were cast in stereotypical and patriarchal roles. The Aphrodite scene is very telling. But most important is Athena, whom Kratos respected and actually cared for, until she betrayed him. And godhood became explicitly a masculine and negative idea. Kratos' aim to prevent Atreus' knowledge of his own godhood is proxy for him trying to prevent Atreus from establishing a sense of masculinity rooted in power, ego, and control. But Kratos should seek to help Atreus find his own means of identity and a path within healthy masculinity rather than dropping him in a pit, hoping it's the right location. Kratos discusses with Mimir, an echo of an older generation of masculinity, but one more concerned with wisdom and strength, and Freya, who is a sort of feminine foil to Kratos. They ascribe Atreus' sickness to him and challenge that he must go to hell and fight for the heart that will heal Atreus. This is, of course, very symbolic. He must go through a hell which resurrects the specters of his past to confront him, wielding the blades coated in the blood of his past sins, and find a literal heart to save his son. I don't know if a more perfect and literal metaphor for opening his heart to the reality of his past and to his son could have been made. He must confront the hell of his past as he pursues the ultimate goal of character development within this game, honesty, and its source of healing. Mimir correctly assesses that they're both gods, but Kratos' very famous story is soaked in blood of gods that he killed, justly or not, for the torture that they put him through. But this hatred extends beyond the now desolate Olympus. He himself is a god, and thus he hates himself too. We see a crack in his resolve, a reason for coldness. Kratos is afraid that his hatred may extend to his son, and maybe even more specifically, why he's been boxing him into the life of a mortal. But confronted by the clearly diminishing warmth and affection of Atreus, he is asked about the truth. He contemplates this in a broad sense and decides to face it. "We are God's boy," he says, and Atreus learns of his past before falling deeper into the ego that comes along with it. Kratos' fears are given substance, but his move was correct nonetheless. And then, between learning of Kratos' paternal relationship and watching the conflict with Baldur, an image of the old Kratos unfold, Atreus starts to understand the dangers of corrupt godhood, or masculinity. Kratos, trying to lead by example, does all he can not to kill Baldur. He wants to nourish his son's instinct of mercy, he expresses as Kratos looms over a vulnerable Baldur. Kratos then only kills Baldur, as he explicitly states, to break the cycle of violence Baldur is proliferating, his hands around his own mother's throat. The goal here is to impart in Atreus the reasons for violence, and more importantly the reasons against it, but also to confirm to himself, to validate his change, while condemning who he once was. Kratos, symbolically, is killing the image of his former self. A self he knows is dead to him, but it isn't exactly a heartfelt moment of growth, so there must be more. Finally, Kratos and Atreus reach the highest peak in the Nine Realms, the place to spread Faye's ashes, our goal since the beginning. In the best scene in the game, a tremendously emotional moment in watching the powerful transformation of our most beloved Kratos. He looks out over the peak and releases his bandages, the symbols of a self there no longer is, but more importantly, an acceptance of it. The final thematic statement of the game is truth. Kratos finds truth in confronting who he was rather than running from and trying to deny it. You will always be the monster. That may be true, but I'm your monster no longer. But there's also truth in who he can be, and truth to Atreus. But as they descend the peak, he finds images of the prophecy of his own death, and a daunting presence of Atreus' identity. Kratos fails to share this with him. As much as he has found truth, he has not finished the development he must. He now exists in a sort of limbo between a godhood of power and control versus a godhood of love and understanding. His masculine transformation is not yet complete. He must still pursue not just truth, but vulnerability, and not just truth, but the right truth, the full, complete truth. The bandages are off, but the wounds must still heal. He has faced the past, but now he must face the future. And if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching part 1. I will be back with part 2, covering God of War Ragnarok, and the completion of Kratos' character arc soon. Really looking forward to it, and I hope that you all are too. Thank you so much for watching.